have just clicked it, so I'm over to you.
Dana?
Welcome, everybody. Good morning, East Coast to West Coast and all points in between. I'm your hostess for today, Dana Litwin, and we've also got joining us Todd McMullen, Jerome Chamiel, who's one of our newer VSys voices. Welcome, Jerome. And Joan Cardellino. Joan and I are on the West Coast in California. Todd's in the middle in Utah, and Jerome is East Coast, DC. So welcome, everyone. And we're really jumping right into hear what your recruiting issues are, or you think they're about to be, or have been very recently, and offer up some technological solutions and kind of ways of thinking about recruitment. Here are our fantastic bios, and this proves I'm the MC today, and I'm helping facilitate the conversation. Thanks for putting that in writing, Todd.
No problem, Dana. Anything I could do.
I appreciate it. Well, you're driving the slides, and for everyone who's figured out that you can, if you are able to, where you're working, where you're watching this, use the chat function. This is an interactive experience. We want to talk with you and have a conversation and discussion. So as we go through some tips and some points and some ways of thinking about recruitment in new ways with the challenges we have, then we also will ask to hear from you. I might ask questions out loud. We might type them in the chat as well. And you can go to all panelists, not all participants, but all panelists and answer us. And also Lisa Lavinia, who is our wonderful behind-the-scenes producer. If only she can see the chat for some reason, she will say that out loud for all of us to answer. But this is as much as you are able to participate and be a part of the discussion, that's part of the value of these webinars and the way that we do these voices is very inclusive and participatory. So thank you all for joining us today. And Todd, if you want to, let's jump right in and see what's going on with folks. So, of course, we are in a very challenging current recruitment environment. There's a lot of changing situations going in and out of crisis mode, of COVID pandemic mode, of extreme weather mode, all across the country. And just getting through the day is challenging enough in these times, let alone getting through your program and keeping recruitment and retention and just even having a sense of stability of what's going to change next. And we are a resource that's here for you all the time. The webinars are a nice couple of times a month reminders that we're here as a resource. And these are recorded, as Lisa and Todd mentioned, and you can also always reach us whenever you want if there's follow-up questions in between the webinars. But really want to check in on who, if you can answer in the chat, who is back to in-person volunteering? We know we have a majority of healthcare facilities and some food banks on the webinar today as participants. And who is still doing, having most of your programs on pause? And so let's just take a temperature check of where people are if you want to answer your kind of current status or any recruitment or coming back to in-person challenges. So Jessica's saying you do have in-person volunteers. That's great. That is good to know. Something that has come up as a particular challenge in California very recently, and Joan brought this up and had an article link, and we can link to that if folks need to. I know we have some Los Angeles and other West Coast folks. Angela says we're back in person. That's great. There's a mandate in California that all healthcare staff and volunteers, and this is the first time volunteers are called out, must be vaccinated. And Joan, was that by September 15th? What was the date on that, if you want to jump in? If Joan can unmute yourself.
I unmuted her.
Great.
Okay, good. Thank you. The date is September 30th.
Oh, September 30th. Okay.
And Montana now, California was the first state to mandate all healthcare workers, and now Montana has issued a mandate against mandates.
Oh goodness, yeah. There's also that challenge of like there's kind of a seesaw and a push and pull of political decisions going on. So Antoinette's is 30. Lynn's got in-person volunteers, but volunteers must be vaccinated. Antoinette's says 30% of the volunteers have returned. They're working on bringing back more. Denise, a very few small in-person group of volunteers. Most programs are still on hold. And Mary's mentioning their on-site vaccines are required by August 30th. I know some other institutions, not necessarily by state or local mandate, but some institutions in the Southwest where colleagues work, it was by September 1st with vaccine staff and volunteer mandate, but they got some notice a couple of months ago. And Lisa, that's a really good point you're bringing up, that a lot of clients are saying that some folks are back, but not in the volume they had in the past. Many have said they need to rebuild programs as so many of the older volunteers aren't coming back for their own comfort level or life moved on or whatever the reasons are. And Angie has a really excellent point. If you're in person and will follow requirements set for employees, but is not mandated vaccination yet, and Marie is saying that volunteers are choosing to go back on leave of absence due to the variant. Now that's something that I know Joan and you and I have, we've all the voices here have talked a lot about, but Joan and I, especially Joan in healthcare, that's a choice that I'm not attending certain in-person potential speaking events. I'm only offering virtual speaking events for the next several months due to the breakthrough infections even among the vaccinated. And Mary's also mentioning Mary Kay, that initial K, not Mary Kay, the product line, are filling about 60% of their shifts, requiring a door attendant has expanded the need for volunteers. So that's interesting that some roles are being added in a healthcare setting or changed or shifted. And Joan, you've talked about that a lot before, so let's have you jump in on what you've been hearing deep in your healthcare sector a little bit, and then we'll get into Jerome and the rest of some of the points we'll cover.
Well, I've been hearing not only healthcare sector, but every sector. Last night they were telling me that all state workers in the state of California have to be vaccinated, and that includes all the volunteers in the state of California, which, now we're getting, we predicted these mandates, by the way, last year, and now they're finally hitting. And so we're going to see how this changes not only the volunteer placement, but the volunteer recruitment efforts. In terms of healthcare, it's not so much the recruitment that's an issue. It's the placement, as you just mentioned, Dana. So, we used to worry about transportation for some of our volunteers to get to a hospital. Well, I don't know if that's even a concern anymore. We're going to be worrying about, what technology, we are worrying about what technology resources our volunteers have access to, and can they get on our network in a safe fashion? Are they using their own equipment? These are the questions we'll be asking in recruitment, and also the screening questions and the qualifications. If we aren't asking them now, this is a permanent shift. It's no longer like a 5%, this is shift to the other. It's 95% of our placements in healthcare. And it's all also affected by the social determinants of health. One thing I have not seen, and this is where the prediction has stayed, and it's going to stay with me, is the opportunity for volunteerism in healthcare is not inside the hospital four walls. That ship sailed a long time ago. Where the opportunity is in social determinants of health. And so how we determine our volunteers as part of our recruitment plans, who are our volunteers going to be? Are we going to count the food bank volunteers that we are partnering with, which our sector still is not doing a good job on that, the volunteer sector isn't, as our volunteers? We've partnered with agencies like this before, like American Cancer Society with Reach to Recovery. This is not a new concept. But for volunteer recruitment now going forward, we're going to have to redefine it. And those of you that are on the call, I'd love to see in the chat, what are your volunteer recruitment plans looking like? Do you even have volunteer recruitment plans? Or is your current plan just to try and get everybody back that you had? So I'm going to stop there and pose that question. I have lots more I can add, but certainly, what is your volunteer recruitment plan looking like today?
Right, and that kind of ties into what Lynn has mentioned in the chat that, breakthrough infections are growing. Volunteers are reluctant to come back. Delta variant and Delta Plus, which is not an airline discount, unfortunately. There's a lot of dangerous mutations that are coming forth, and that's impacting our decisions as leaders of volunteers and every volunteer's own priorities, quite frankly, of where they put their time and how they protect their own health. And Lynn also mentions that the leadership wants us to bring back as many as volunteers as possible in Connecticut, and what the executives ask for and what's possible for you as a program director or leader and what volunteers or the public in general want to do can be three entirely different things. Marie's mentioning they're currently onboarding to fill the voids left by volunteers who are still on leave of absence or choosing not to return at all, and that's a very fair assessment for folks. Mary is mentioning that recruiting new volunteers is deferred to October at this time. I know I'm watching a lot of organizations, and even in Silicon Valley tech companies keep pushing the goalpost of back to the office. It was going to be September, October. Now they're talking about January or March in many organizations. And May's also saying, they're a university hospital, so how you get a lot of volunteers from the community and from students and other schools. But if the schools aren't back, or if they're really limited in what students can do in order to stay COVID safe on campus, that impacts it. So like you said, Joan, and as we're going to get into, there's a lot of other community factors. It's not just a CEO or executive director saying, bring everybody back. This is why we're here and talking about it. And Angie mentions there's former volunteers that returned, and to meet outside organizations is able. They're trying to recruit new people. And Antoinetta, they're working on bringing back the current volunteers who are able and willing to return and not yet recruiting new volunteers. And that kind of ties into this slide that, the core ideas of engaging people, engaging the community, recruiting volunteers, those don't change drastically. The tools we use, the kinds of technologies, the way we communicate with each other, the way we connect with each other, and market the mission or let people know the opportunity exists. Those change slightly around the edges, but the core values of someone who resonates with the mission, where an opportunity fits into their life and that they feel heard and valued and comfortable and safe and welcome in that role, especially if that's a very emotionally or physically challenging role. I know I've worked at food banks, and Joan's worked in healthcare, so we know those can be physically demanding and emotionally demanding roles for volunteers. But what we're talking about today is not just how technology has worked to connect us, or sometimes even been a digital divide in 2020 and kind of moving to more virtual things, but really adopting new ways of thinking. So we're not changing, the foundation of how we recruit, but we want to think about things in a little bit of a different way. Joan brought up social determinants of health, and then that's going to lead us to some new practices and getting out of the comfort zone. So I want to talk about Mary's in the chat, and then we'll jump into Jerome here. But Mary says we did not get into a county vote in contest for best in county and won best nonprofit public servant. So that's helping them advertise. So they basically won a community award. And they also got into the city guide with a volunteer photo to help recruit. So that's a great just community awareness. But Jerome, welcome to the conversation, and tell us about this paradigm shift that we're in.
Thank you so much, Dana, and good morning to everybody on today's webinar. So I'm going to take a yes and approach. So I agree with everything that Dana and Joan brought up, and I think what's also going to make things a little bit more tricky is this paradigm shift that we're seeing. So for years, the United Nations, they have been sharing a report. It's called The State of World Volunteerism, And when you look at this report, you'll see that close to 70% of the world's collective volunteering is informal. And when I mean that it's informal is that it's often peer-to-peer. This is neighbor helping neighbor, family helping other family members, their close friends. This is individual members within the community galvanizing at the grassroots level to really make that direct change in their neighborhood, in their community, the way that they want to see it. It's citizens circumventing formalized institutions. And of course, these formalized institutions are nonprofit organizations, other tax-exempt entities, and even within the governmental sector. And I think many of us have been seeing or even feeling this to varying degrees, but I'll also share that this trend is becoming even far more pronounced, and I'll get into some of the reasons why. I think informal volunteerism, it's not new. This is not a new thing, but especially here in the United States, we have seen certain spikes around informal volunteerism. I would say the most notable being around the 2016 election. The outcome, of course, it increased informal volunteerism like peaceful protesting and marching and other forms of advocacy at the grassroots levels because individual citizens wanted to express their values through the way that they give their time, not necessarily to any specific organization, but to specific causes and social movements. And people are still doing this. And I would say when we look at last year, 2020, I would say there are a couple different things happening there, but communities are recognizing that the systems that really got us here socially and economically are not creating the change that I think many of us want to see. And this, of course, it includes all the sectors, right? As I mentioned, nonprofit sector, governmental sector, and even within for-profit industry. Anecdotally, I'll also share that, I have seen recent articles that also indicate that there's a growing mistrust of formal institutions, and I think that is fueling some of that appetite to make direct change at the informal level. The question that I think people are really starting to ask is, why should I give my time and treasure to organizations, large institutions that I believe are part of the problem that got us here in the first place? And I don't think that people are wrong in asking that and also seeking different solutions. And so I share all this because I think to adapt and to Dana's point, I think there are certainly evergreen practices that will stay tried and true that we can continue to seek. But I believe that this paradigm shift will also require an adoption of new tactics, which Todd will cover shortly. It will also take a different approach in how we even think about volunteering, how we recognize it, how we even value it as an act of kindness as a Western nation. And of course, we're starting to see this shift in thinking. COVID-19 coupled with the overt racial injustice that we saw last year, I think in many ways was a catalyst to really opening the minds of people, right? Drastic times call for drastic measures, and people are becoming much more open to solutions that they may have never considered before. And I'm going to share a couple different examples. I mentioned very briefly peaceful marching and protesting and advocacy at the grassroots level that circumvents formal institutions. People don't generally think about that as volunteerism, but it is a gift of one's time. And what's really cool is like within corporate social responsibility, these are for-profit companies, actually started to acknowledge this. There are a couple different companies that have been behind this, but have been creating mechanisms like paid social justice time off for employees who wanted to march in the streets and to give voice to these social issues, very similar to how a company would give paid volunteer time off. They essentially gave time off for people to march and protest, albeit peacefully. And then the last thing I'll share on this slide is that one of the things so the state of Maryland, I'm an appointed commissioner, and as we were going through this year's process of the Youth Services Awards nomination, we actually made some significant changes. We opened up the process for nomination for an award at the state level to accept informal acts of volunteerism. So youth helping others in the community, albeit bypassing established institutions. So people are becoming much more open to the idea of peer-to-peer volunteerism. And this is precisely why this slide has a photo of the brain's prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that's most notably understood for giving a person's executive function. And executive function, it relates to our ability as a human to differentiate and navigate things like conflicting thoughts, or determining good versus bad, or even understanding the future consequences of our current actions and activities. So in many ways, we'll have to really start to rethink our values and understanding of volunteerism. I used to have a boss who was incredibly whimsical and creative. He's somebody who would always remind me of the Mad Hatter from like the original Alice in Wonderland movie. But before he would present an idea, he'd always say this. He'd say, "Jerome, I want you to close your eyes and open your mind." And I'm asking each of you on the webinar today to do just that, because just shortly I'll be followed by Todd, who will he'll share some concepts that are that are coming into the next couple of years. And I think in order to grasp these new concepts and frameworks and ideas, the planning process will have to start now in many ways. And so I'm really excited for what Todd is going to share. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Todd.
All right, I appreciate that, Jerome, and thank you again, everybody, for being here. It's our pleasure to be a part of your Monday morning. And I want to echo what everybody else has said on this call. Dana, you've done a great job of trying to pull everybody here and find out where they're at, and all of you have come back saying in one form or another, we are not using all of our volunteers yet. We are hurting for a shortage of volunteers. And so I think part of why you came to this webinar today is to try to get answers to that solution. And we've been talking about how, okay, we've got to change your way of thinking a little bit. Jerome said paradigm shift, even talking about prefrontal cortexes, and I'm going to take us into outer space. And so, we don't want you to think with all of that we aren't trying to answer your questions. We understand that there are current issues. And and I guess the challenge that we're facing as consultants is that, of course, all of you are in different positions. You're all very valuable customers of ours. We want to be able to tailor our advice and suggestions and backgrounds and anything we can bring to the table to your specific situation. So I guess my best answer would be, first of all, keep listening. Second of all, because we will get to some good ideas at the end. Second of all, give us a call. Email me. I'll put my email here. I can connect with the others who are on this call. You can also email Lisa, and we'll get you some specific advice. But in general, the paradigm shift is very real, and we are going to have to change, like everybody's having to change lots of ways that they think about lots of things into the future. And so here we go. So all of you are aware of the Perseverance rover up on Mars right now. Many of you may not be aware of what this crazy looking thing is on the right-hand side. That is a quantum computer. So it's proof that science fiction is becoming reality all around us, but also that our earthbound technological wonders are just as impressive. We celebrated Perseverance, and quantum computers like this one are already here and starting to predict outbreaks like COVID in any given population in advance and better guide our responses. And given enough genome data, they could even predict outbreaks years in advance. And they'll likely revolutionize the pharmaceutical industry within 10 years because of their computational power. The same kinds of advances are available in volunteerism, and we're here to show how that may look. Previously complex problems like homelessness, poverty, and neglect, we think will be addressed, and you heard us talking about this a few minutes ago, Jerome in particular, about the combined capacity of humanity itself. It's that 70% he was referring to instead of the 30% that we all work with. And harnessing that a little bit more. That's what we're going to be talking about here. And so every person and problem will then be surrounded, if you will, by a web of caring people who are working together using technology to collaborate. The entire concept, therefore, of addressing problems with broad brushstrokes and underfunded, one-size-fits-all programs will give way to individualized compassion backed by collective decision-making, guided by professionals like yourselves tied together through tech. A good example might be Snapchat, which allows for people to discover nearby social activities through interactive maps on their phones. There are others that do that too. They could then engage directly and immediately, just walk over to the venue, and get involved. Imagine how that might work with volunteerism and how this will change the dynamic of our jobs. I'll lay it out there for you. In the future, alerts for new ways to give time and money will be customized and transmitted to individuals across technologies they're already using. Micro grants, cross engagements, goal setting, and even outcome measurement will be handled by the crowd. Socialization, gamification, and recognition will also be handled by the crowd. Now let's meet Jayla, the volunteer, and Janice, the homebound widow, just for the sake of giving you an example. Janice's daughter, Janice is the homebound widow, has listed her mom's needs through this new system we're envisioning directly, or perhaps through her favorite social media site, Snapchat, Facebook, it doesn't matter. It publishes Janice's needs, the current needs, to pre-qualified volunteers who live or work nearby, have completed personal background checks, and complied with other local requirements through the same network. All of that paperwork done. Jayla decides she wants to help out, but can't meet all of Janice's needs alone, and therefore recruits some of her friends, like these folks. And these become Janice's informal caregiver network. They work together to meet day-to-day needs. If Jayla usually walks the dog but can't do it one day, she alerts the circle, and her mom, her friends, stranger, or a bored Uber driver who happens to be parked near Janice's home steps in to help spontaneously and seamlessly. All of them have been pre-vetted, as we talked about, and approved through networks to make their background verifications and professional credentials commutable, shareable, verifiable by anybody, and that includes Janice's family. This way, Janice gets better care, and Jayla gets the satisfaction of having convened lots of people to help someone, leading to an overall increase in both giving and care. Building informal care networks to reinforce families also reduces potential problems before they become acute and expensive. In the future, we therefore envision volunteers will save health networks billions of dollars while also increasing care, and it's actually started to happen in a few situations we could tell you about. Let's extend the example for a minute. One day, Jayla's co-worker, Jeff, notices that Janice is exhibiting unusual exhaustion and shaking hands. Now, folks, we know that if Janice's symptoms were acute, that Jeff would bypass the team and call 911. But in this case, he reaches out to Janice's family through the network, and the decision is made to immediately send Janice to a nearby medical facility. Jeff presses a button that summons an ambulance and alerts the hospital because they are listed as providers in the same network as well. As someone that Janice now considers as a caregiver, he could even join her on the ride and at the facility if he has time before her daughter arrives. Now meet Vicki, the volunteer coordinator at the hospital. When Jeff or Janice's daughter pressed that big red button that referred Janice to the hospital she works for, Vicki is immediately admitted into Janice's volunteer care circle. After Janice's condition has been addressed, Vicki will have the option of inviting Janice's care circle members to have a more formal role inside the hospital's volunteer corps so that aftercare can be coordinated by medical staff. If Vicki's volunteer management system is also integrated with the network, she can receive the volunteers' existing credentials, facilitate trainings and paperwork virtually, and onboard the whole circle as provisional aftercare volunteers within minutes, especially since the family has already authorized them. We all need to remember that it is Janice and her family who are ultimately the ones who determine who has access to her and what care she receives, whether it's inside or outside a facility. In fact, this has all been happening through friends and family networks for countless years, just the way Jerome was talking about. Technology will just expand existing families using volunteers who will reinforce their care. It's natural, simple, and powerful. And I might point out here that while we've been talking about all of this in a healthcare network, the exact same models are available in homelessness, education. I've done a lot of these presentations for schools, trying to get spontaneous volunteers and networks of volunteers in front of classroom students where there's trouble with, I don't care if it's literacy or behaviors, it's all stuff where getting more caring adults into the lives of these people in a network-controlled way under the direction of professionals works. And that's what we see as the future. When it comes to creating networked healthcare or quantum models to predict future needs before they arise, it's all about capturing data. And again, I don't care about the setting. I don't care if this is healthcare. I don't care if it's education. I don't care if it's any of the social ills we've talked about. We need to move way beyond things like the HCAP survey by using these same systems discussed here today to capture preventative health, current concerns, interventions, and follow-up care as each of these occur. Volunteer family care networks often have more of this crucial data than medical professionals and facilities do because it comes from day-to-day observations and responses more than the acute ones. Volunteers and families are the actual fabric in the care tapestry, and we will use the same social apps to capture quick observations, opinions, and even vitals directly from the people who are nearest your patients the most. So, that's why we've been talking about, I guess you can imagine what medical professionals, trend analysts, and social scientists could do with exponentially more data, and you understand why we started this segment today with pictures of Perseverance rover and a quantum computer.
So coming from outer space.
Thank you, Dana. Bring us back.
And super smart. So we've been on the ground, boots on the ground, orbital, high space, high tech, high touch. But I think that high touch piece that you and social determinants of health that you're talking about, and Jerome with community support, mutual aid, people aligning for a cause, formally or informally, resonating with a mission, gets to this kind of, super sci-fi quantum computing stuff. But it really does come down to that social network, right? And I want to hear from. We just gave you a lot of information to absorb for the a lot.
I didn't even get to talk about intermixed quantum realities, and how we're
quantum entanglement. Yeah,
I want us to quantum entanglement. I mean, sorry.
The physics lesson will be in the next few webinars. You can sign up for Todd's special quantum entanglement of volunteer engagement, which is a very exciting topic. And I want to ask those who can participate in the chat. We know a couple people had to hop off a few minutes ago for other meetings and things. But where is everyone with how you're using your technology, not just VSys One and in our systems, but how are you integrating social media? We know we've got a little bit of community coverage from winning awards or getting things in newsletters or local magazines, but how do you feel about how you're using, the tools in your toolbox for technology and community so far? And thank you, Mary, for having a very, very quick on the draw answer. Mary's mentioning that they recruit via social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and they're working to always build their network wider, and they want to look at volunteer apps to advertise. And I think that's a really interesting thing that has been coming up more and more and more is volunteer match tends to be a main platform, and then they license what's called the API. They license their platform to a lot of other new apps that are using that kind of technology. Some things are Salesforce-based. But Todd, do you want to mention what you've seen in any trends, and then we'll bring Jerome and Joan back in the conversation too, of what are you seeing with apps and that effectiveness, or are these a lot of flash in the pans and then they don't sustain?
Do you want me to answer with or without quantum entanglement?
We'll leave quantum entanglement in the parking lot for now, but we'll circle back. I promise.
So you just want app entanglement. Okay.
Entanglement.
App entanglement. Okay, leaving Mars out of the equation. Okay.
Yeah, for now.
All right. No, thank you, Dana. And I'm just going to reinforce what you already said, because we don't want to get into specific suggestions without knowing your personal situation better, especially when it comes to technology, and we are one of your technology providers. So, yes, we have a stake in that, so please give us a call. Getting back to the question, absolutely yes. There are a lot of apps out there that we are seeing, and Volunteer Match is not the only platform that is connecting with them. There are some broader networks that we could talk to you about that, and there's a desire for like a super network of all community service opportunities that might tie everybody, including everybody on this call, into a single construct. We call that the national platform. Those things are all brewing. We're certainly not the only ones talking about these trends. In fact, there's some resources up on our VSys page from other third parties like Stanford University, where everything that I was talking about, maybe without Mars, is up there, and that includes answers to your question, Dana, about how to integrate, how to interrelate, how to build frameworks and foundations technologically. So we're aware, and that's my best answer.
Yeah, and Jerome, talking about social justice resonance and, aligning with the mission and where people are putting their priorities, and this also speaks to, the use of social media has certainly been extremely important for a lot of social justice and cause communication. And I've always put out there that, hashtags and likes are free. So if you can just come up with an official hashtag for your mission that your volunteers can tweet out, Insta out, Snapchat out, Facebook out, and post while they're working before, during, and after, that can grab a hold and become very important and very viral. And we know that a volunteer having a meaningful experience, I'm not going to say happy or good, but having a meaningful experience is the best advertisement. So Jerome, do you want to pop in on, how that social media piece can amplify?
Yeah, and I also think that social media, depending on the platform that you're using, it's a little bit more personal. It's more personable, but I also think that, for example, if my buddy Joe Hooks posts something on Facebook and we're all connected within the same Facebook page or group, and if he's putting out a post because he needs X, Y, and Z for his organization, I am much more likely to respond to that than I am just maybe a general newsletter or a communique that I might get from a large organization. And so I think people are starting to think about the ways that they can leverage social media in a way that makes sense for them. The other thing, and I'm going to sort of pull the sort of corporate responsibility aspect into this too, because I think one of the other trends that I'm starting to see that just sort of really amplifies this idea of peer-to-peer, or what I'm going to call voice and choice, is that employees at large companies that have these massive social impact strategies and very rigid definitions or avenues for their employees to volunteer, what I'm starting to see is that voice and choice of the employee, of the individual, is becoming far more important to address. And companies that are not harnessing that voice and choice, the peer-to-peer, they're having struggles with getting their employees lined up or aligned with the strategy that they might have as a company. And so, and I think social media adds to that because, I'm on multiple social feeds throughout the day, and I check these things regularly, and that's where I get a lot of my, I get a lot of tweets and messages, and those organizations that are leveraging that, I think, are getting much more traction.
Yeah, and I think voice and choice are, that might be our hashtag for today, or this little webinar series in August. And Lisa herself, our fantastic wizard behind the curtain today, saying her main volunteer job came about because a friend of hers posted on her Facebook about the volunteer work she was doing with homeless children, and Lisa started to go with her friend, and then that branched out. I got into this profession 20 years ago because a friend of a friend was leaving a Project Open Hand in what had been an entry-level volunteer coordinator job, and I wanted to change careers, and that resonated with me to do that kind of work, speaking to our food bank friends online. And for Joan, I want to just touch on this a little bit, then I'll bring Joan and Todd into the conversation as well, but I think this is a really important point that gets to that foundation of recruitment doesn't change, which is friends and family, someone having a meaningful or interesting experience. That's the best advertising. Getting other advocates of your mission who are really deeply connected to the mission and the work that you're doing out into the community. Like, you can't do bought media or earned media or info advertisement. You can't do anything that's as powerful as that. And that ties into kind of recruitment, retention, recognition, these kind of triple R's, that recognition is also in every moment. So saying with every interaction with a volunteer, a smile is free, thank you is free, remembering people's names is pretty great if we are back in person. But every moment is that chance to, every interaction is kind of an invitation to stay engaged or an invitation to go or be turned off by what's happening with the organization in the work itself and the culture. And there's a lot of ways to value volunteers' expertise in offering leadership positions. And I've done a number of recent client surveys in different kinds of organizations, but all kind of larger institutions where we ask people, how do you want to feel valued and recognized or celebrated in your work? And they're like, listen to my ideas, leverage my expertise as a specialist in this area or this role, and I'd love to learn from other volunteers and have the opportunity to teach them as well. And really that wisdom in the room and valuing people for the individual skills and experience in the role and just kind of in their life and their stand in the community is super important. And Todd and I are big fans of gamification, of using social media and hashtags for kind of fun little teamwork and competitions and before and after pictures in the food bank of how many things got bagged up or in the hospital or, fun things like that. So there's a lot of ways to rethink and approach the free tools that we have, the tools in the toolbox, social media accounts, things like that, not just our websites or kind of traditional recruitment modes. And Joan, I want to check in with you and also ask those who can answer in the chat. What are some specific recruitment strategies that you're finding are still working, and where are you really hitting a challenge or hitting a barrier that we as the voices can maybe help get you through that challenge and that barrier? We talked about there seems to be a pattern of people like, well, we're our current volunteers, but we also need to find new ones and kind of that balance point. So if those who can answer in the chat say, what do you really hope to do next? How can we help you start today to take that next step? And Joan, what are some trends that you've been seeing very recently in your healthcare experience?
Well, I am, again, in the weeds still.
Yeah.
I've sat in everybody's chair that's on this call running large volunteer programs in a healthcare setting, did it for years. So the core, and as we move through COVID-19, I've really stayed in contact and in touch with a lot of my peers throughout the world, really. What I go back to again is what has changed in what we used to do and what we knew as was real. What's the textbook revisions? What are the textbook revisions that need to take place? And today we're talking about recruitment of volunteers. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to recruitment of volunteers, for me has never been recruitment of volunteers. That's always been easy. Healthcare and attracting helpers to healthcare has always not been easy, but easier because of our mission. What's crucial, and that has changed immeasurably, is our survey of needs and the results that come back. Mm. So those of you that are on the call, if I was sitting in your seat, I go back to the Plan, Do, Check, Act, which I still use. I got it out again last night. It's on our website, planning for 30, 60, 90 days. And the reason I got it out was because of all the changes that are happening in California with the COVID-19 mandate. And I thought, all right, if I was sitting in that chair, I get my Plan, Do, Check, Back out. This has changed remarkably. What am I going to do in the next 30 days? What am I going to do in the next 60 days? And hypothetically in the next 90 days, because we can't plan any longer than that. How has this mandate changed my recruitment efforts? And that leads me back to the survey of needs. And if you don't have a recruitment plan in place, I would be writing one for 30, 60, 90 days. Mm-hmm. Even if it's to bring no one in or is it to partner with somebody. But in terms of the internal survey of needs, what does your institution need in terms of volunteerism? Avoid these conversations out in la-la land in the air where we need volunteers. Get right down the specifics, department people by department. Go through them again and again and again and keep asking them every 30, 60, 90 days and keep a record of that. check, I ask cost center 8318. Check, I ask cost center, check, and stay in contact internally with your group because that's really who you're working for. And then you turn that survey of needs into a recruitment plan. And if you're coming back that you need new volunteers, that's one plan. If you're coming back that they want the ones they had, that's another plan. So that's where I would be if I was in your seat right now. The other thing is a lot of what we were discussing on today's call is taking for granted, is assuming that everyone has access to the internet. And we still don't know that is the case yet. Right. So one of the things I would be keeping my ear to the ground about within your own organization is within admissions or any one of your medical records or healthcare records development, which by the way is that whole process is tightly related to volunteer recruitment now, like it never was before. And that's a whole other conversation. But I'm wondering, are they surveying your patient population asking who has access to the internet? That is an admission question now, so that they can tell, and we actually use these technological tools that we have in hand with your patient population. Or is this still just theory? Given process in place within your institution for screening, for access to technology. And then if they don't give a process in place within your institution for getting them the technology they need. Volunteerism can play a role in that. We've filled voids like that before. You can get a car seat, you can get somebody's phone, and internet access, same thing. So we have to use some of the skills we have in the past to adapt to the answers we're getting for these new survey of needs. And don't be freaked out when people are asking you for things they never asked you for before. That's our job, is to figure that out. And that's kind of part of the exciting part of the job. And the other thing I want to say is traditionally with social determinants of health, our partners with volunteer assignments and programs that have been developed within healthcare have really been the social workers. They've been, and they still are, your key friends through all of this COVID-19 and new volunteer placements and opportunities and these technological developments that are available now. But more than that, what has now developed, and I hope that you're studying the development of your medical record system internally, because those social determinants of health issues are now embedded in everybody's medical record. And from that comes survey of needs answers for you as they're asking patients those social determinants of health questions now in medical records. Unmet needs are arising, and so you need to acquaint your staff with the fact that I'm ready, bring them on, bring them on.
Yeah, and I think that ties into the other themes that we've all talked about today, which is the basic skill sets and some of the bricks and foundations of recruitment don't change, but the tools in the toolbox do, and that's kind of what we're talking about. And I want to acknowledge a couple cool things that have happened in chat. Thank you, Lisa, for putting the link, because it is on our VSys Voices resource page. The Plan, Do, Check, Act, that graphic and kind of explanation, that document is on the Voices webpage. And Mary's mentioning that her institution created a strategy in early 2020 called Recruit, Retain, Reward, with current and future state for all three. And we need to revisit that post-pandemic. And that's wonderful that you did that, Mary, because a lot of institutions just kind of shut down without any really good communication to the volunteers, and that's made it harder to come back and recruit people who were disengaged or disconnected. So I think that's important. And to Joan's point of like about every 3 months or so, we're in such a changing world environment, economy situation how's that doing? How's that doing on that 90-day cycle? And yes, and to the digital divide possibility that some of the tools in the toolbox, speaking of this slide, that may be asked for is there are more, what's happened in the last few years but has been particularly helpful or useful in 2020 where we've had to work safely by working more remotely and doing more online is the recognition that not everyone has internet access in whatever area they are. The infrastructure may not exist. They may not have a smartphone or tablet or access to a computer. So some of the tools in the toolbox and some of the outside organizations listed here today is like, Volunteer Match and Idealist and others are recruitment platforms. So maybe hopefully you've got that in your toolbox where you have not just your own website and social media, but are hosted on some sort of recruitment platform as well. But N10, Nonprofit Technology, and they have a conference, a lot of information webinars as well. TechSoup, Tech for Good, and Code for America, in addition to us as VSys Voices, those are nonprofits primarily volunteer run. Sometimes there are some staff positions, but these are groups that are there to either help provide information about technology access, help provide direct access, and know who's giving out tablets or what company in your area or what other foundation is funding grants to get better internet and access in your area. But also specifically, kind of TechSoup and Tech for Good are in those two categories. But Code for America is if you require something in your website to be built out, or you were looking for people to help with a social media strategy or something along those lines, or a tech tool strategy, in addition to the ones you have, Code for America consists of volunteers who are that high-tech skilled, IT skilled consultants and people who will really literally write code and write programs for nonprofits that need that. So we're mentioning this because there's a lot out there for you to put into your toolbox, and we as the Voices have all these resources on our page, our VSys Voices page. We bring these things up in webinars. This is recorded. You can come back and review it as you need. And as Todd and others have mentioned before, you can always get in touch with us. We only don't just come out of hiding for these webinars. We exist all the time. We're happy to help you all the time. You can get in touch with Lisa or your local VSys One support person, and they can get in touch with any of the Voices if you want to reach us as a group or specifically as individuals for our individual skill sets and experience. But we're here as, this is a resource for you. This is a resource that you have, and the technology of the VMS that you're using with us is very robust, and we're happy to answer, these questions in this wider context of recruit, retain, reward, recognize, and just really help get through this extremely challenging time where we sometimes literally don't know what's around the corner for a weather event or a societal event or a viral event, good or bad.
And Dana, can I add a couple things to comment that? When you're doing the survey of needs also, there are some new questions that have come up that you need to have the discussion with your staff about, and it applies to technology really. But first question I'd be asking is, what level of access to the medical or health records does this volunteer placement now have or require? I don't know if you're having that discussion, but it's key because medical records are, as you know now, all online, and so if a volunteer placement has to go into that medical record, it used to be like informal, now it's got to be crystal clear, and what category do they fit into? So that's really important when it comes to these tools and resources and actually rebuilding your volunteer program. Huge shift now, telemedicine, e-health. So linking volunteers into medical records, crucial now, used to be optional. The other thing is this volunteer placement as part of your survey of needs, new question, is it an essential volunteer, meaning or versus non-essential? Because again, many of our volunteer placements were always looked at as non-essential, and that's why nobody, a few of them are being called back. So try and figure out what your essential volunteer placements are today and going forward. Incorporate that wording into everything that you do and focus your recruitment efforts on the essential volunteers. And that essential volunteer title may change every 30, 60, 90 days. So just be prepared for that. And last, when it comes to your 501c3, I think everybody on here is a nonprofit hospital. I'm wondering, and if you put that in chat, if we have time, we'll close at the end. Your Form 990s are going to have to be filled out for 2020. And so line 6 is how many volunteers do your organization use? And I'm wondering what that answer is going to be. And this, by the way, the justification for your institution's nonprofit status, which is still a big concern. So I don't know who we would ask, whether in finance, who fills out your 990, but is anyone concerned that line is going to be really bad for...
It's going to be a squiggly line in 2020, 2021. Yeah.
I read a lot of exemptions. They've listed a lot of mandates, like the 5% for hospice volunteers and all that kind of thing, but I have not read any exemptions for 990. So that's my last, when it comes to recruitment. And if you might want to bring that to your administration's attention. It may be important to them, it may not. My point is, ask the question. And it may help you then with your survey of needs if they realize if for no other reason and you volunteers to justify, worst case scenario, justify their nonprofit status.
Right. So in our last few minutes, that's great, Joan, and it's good to get into, some of the real administrative and nitty-gritty things that are being impacted by all the uncertainty and the back and forth. So in the last few minutes, if anyone does have any questions that they want to put in chat, or if you have any comments about that form, but also I want to get Jerome's last kind of wrap-up sentiments, and since you've been listening so well in this conversation, then we'll get to Todd, and then we'll wrap up right after that. So go ahead, Jerome.
Yeah, the last thing I'll just sort of say is I just want to double tap on the idea of the simple determinants of health. In corporate responsibility, those are conversations that we are now having with organizations that are outside of healthcare. To Joan's point, 90% of our health is determined outside of the healthcare system. And so those are conversations that we're starting to have in corporate America. How is our company as an employer or as a, corporate employee volunteer program, how are we addressing some of these things that have long-term implications?
Exactly. Todd, any parting thoughts? Go ahead.
I think my parting thoughts, folks, are more on the empathetic side. We've had a lot of information hit us. We've had a lot of situations and crises hit us, personally, globally, locally, in all the different ways. And our volunteers are human. We are human. We need to watch our stress factors and levels. We need to look out for one another. We need to be cognizant of the mental and emotional challenges that are going on there, meet our own needs, and then help others to meet theirs. And volunteers could be a tremendous value to that. And volunteerism, with volunteers coming in and commiserating with one another and sharing one another's burdens while they also help other people, can be of such great value in the challenges that we are facing. So please don't forget yourselves and the value, the fundamental value we were talking about at the very beginning of this presentation, the fundamental value and goodness of volunteerism. And I think with that, we have a wrap. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. And again, we'll see you next time. Next month with special guest Paul. So thank you all, and we hope you're well. Check out the VSys Voices webpage for more resources, and you can always reach us at any time.
Yep, just send me an email. Thank you.
Thanks.